The Connected City Design Challenge is an urban design competition seeking design strategies to connect downtown Dallas and the Trinity River, curated by Larry Beasley and produced by the City of Dallas's City Design Studio. On October 29th, OMA AMO of New York presented their team proposal for the Connected City Design Challenge at the Dallas Museum of Art. The lecture was hosted by the Dallas City Design Studio Assistant Director David Whitley. Special thanks to the Dallas Museum of Art for hosting the lecture. To learn more about the challenge, please visit connectedcitydesign.com.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming. I'd like to welcome y'all to our continuing series on the Connected City Design Challenge. This is, I believe, the third in our installment of 4. And special thanks this evening to the DMA for providing the venue. Also, a special thanks to our partners, the City of Dallas, as well as the Trinity Trust, Downtown Dallas, Inc., and the Real Estate Council. Without them, this would not be possible. I'm David Whitley with the City of Dallas and Dallas City Design Studio. And just a quick reminder about what we're all here to learn about. The Connected City Design Challenge launched back in the spring with the fundamental question of how do we connect in a meaningful way downtown Dallas with the Trinity River. And so we sent out to the universe this the idea of this sort of void between those two spaces with the request, what if? What could we do in this space to really make a meaningful contribution to our community, as well as very meaningful and deep connections between those two assets within our city? A jury went through the process then of selecting as a group of professional teams to bring us their best ideas from around the globe. They selected Ricardo Bofill, OMA, whom we are joined with this evening, and Stas Plus Shop. Speaking on behalf of OMA this evening is Shohei Shigematsu, as well as Jason Long from OMA, and from Mia Lara and Associates, Mia Lara and Ben Feldman. Also joining us this evening from the teams, and you'll see the volume of work that has gone into this has required not only the folks upon the stage, but a whole litany of folks behind the scenes, I believe, that are probably even still working on the presentation as we speak. Lawrence Su from OMA, and from Kevin Sloan Associates, Kevin Sloan, Ting Lai, and Lisa Horn. So we want to welcome all of them this evening as well, and at the end, just fully appreciate the amount of work and thought that they put into this question before them. Also, as part of the competition, we had an open ideas portion of the competition line, and we received over 100 entries on that to that website. They're all available online to be viewed at connectedcitydesign.com, as well as more detail about each of the professional stream entries that you'll be hearing about over the next few weeks. Just a quick reminder of where we are. We are in the middle of the presentations. We are joined, as I mentioned this evening, by OMA, and then next week you can return again for the Stas Plus Shop lecture right back here at the DMA at 6:30. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sho. The room is yours, Sho. Thank you.
Good evening. First, I would like to thank Gail and Didi and people who were involved on this competition. We felt, of course, the passion and the dedication to make this competition happen, and we wanted to respond sincerely and to keep the momentum going. And I hope whoever will be either chosen or being involved, I sincerely hope that this discussion continues to the moment that something gets realized according to your ambition. So very quick overview. I gave a talk in July, which feels like ages ago already, but in that I talked about some introduction of how we are thinking about the cities, and just in case you haven't heard, I'm gonna go very quickly how I present it. So if I may start from the introduction of the office, we have this much of offices in the world. So we have about 300 architects dealing more than 120 projects. We were lucky enough to be involved in this city to do architecture, which I heard also the selection process happened in exact auditorium where we are now with some dramas and technical difficulties. I'm so glad that I wasn't there. Anyway, this is a very naive diagram, but it shows, it means a lot to our profession. So last year, the people who lives in the city surpassed basically people who are in suburban area or rural area. And in 10 years, there will be 30 megacities. Megacities are cities that has more than 10 million population, spread across the world. And the megacities will be creating a lot of economical impact and scientific innovation. And one of the cities will surpass the GDP of that of the countries. So the city is becoming more and more mega and not really something that we know of. So our take is that we as an architect and urbanist, we cannot deal with this situation with our single mind like it used to be. We have to collectively work to draw a future. So that's why we appreciate this initiative of Connected City, where we felt that the interdisciplinary talk, different profession, different perspective were mixed during the process, so we could really accommodate those different opinions. In our office also structurally, we reflected that kind of ambition, having OMA as an architectural arm and AMO, which is a non-architectural arm that deals with non-architectural commissions. Through those structures, we have delivered many master plans, like World UNESCO site in Essen, in London, where the problematic dome is, a new business center, business district for Dubai, a port city in Shenzhen, an airport city in Doha. But throughout, we have been dealing with also a lot of issues like connectivity. This is the one in London, in White City, where BBC is, where it's surrounded by very heavy infrastructure problem, where we delivered a master plan. Also in Toronto, where the city is expecting a heavy growth, you know, that needs to go through a lot of different transformation in terms of how you perceive the city itself. So we propose this kind of network city rather than just a downtown model. In Miami Beach, we just won a competition to revitalize the convention center and the vicinity to create a true civic center where connectivity is mitigated or achieved through a landscape and traffic manipulation. We just won a competition in Bogota in South America, in Colombia, which the site is in the center between the airport and the city center. Where a lot of initiatives have happened around this site, where the site is in red. So only thing we did was to connect. So this was the site. The site was sandwiched by the park, one of the most prominent park and one of the most prominent universities. So we basically literally connected that with a public space that defined the new governmental center. Because it's curved, it creates a much larger surface to also be friendly to the development, looking down to the public space. So the land values are going up and connected to the park, and defines loosely the kind of monumental area that is that has a mixture of commercial and governmental program. Resilience is becoming one of the biggest issues, and also for this Trinity River corridor, of course, the 100 years flood, that's a word that floats everywhere by now. It's of course relevant in New York too. We just did this it's still ongoing, a project for rebuilt by design. For example, if you want to build a wall that protects let's say, the impact of 100 years flood for the equivalent of Hurricane Sandy, you need $2.5 trillion, which is more GDP of a year than it was affected. So that means you have to spend more money to protect what is less. So that was the biggest question. And also how to measure the risk. You know, probably this is New Orleans and New York on the right side. New Orleans have 4 times more probability to have a hurricane, but because the density is much higher in New York, the flood risk is much, much bigger. So once it happens, the New York gets affected higher. So we have to start thinking how to actually measure the risk and visualize the risk and talk about the risk. So we somehow mapped different values, risk, value, impact, and also a lot of infrastructural node, like the gas tanks and also, again, infrastructural node, and identified in this New York region what the focused area should be. So instead of spending money to homogeneously to every coastline, we identify the area that the money should be spent. And also, what's interesting about the resiliency is that cannot be done by a master plan, but it should be a manifesto. So what we started to think, which we think is relevant in this case too, is to have communicate the risk to people. So this is what 100 years flood means, 5 times as likely as getting a flush in poker. I mean, that doesn't mean so much to you probably, but different way of visualizing the risk. Also, we made this Flood Risk 101 brochure because, as you know, when the flood happens, it's very difficult to communicate through media. So this is a two-way of educating the public. So first, the Risk 101, what the flood risk is. But also after so that's before the flooding. And after the flooding, we're also contemplating how we can actually communicate the evacuation strategy and what happens. For example, utilizing the Times Square's screen and so on. Also, I mean, we just proposed a scheme in relation to this practice to make JFK Airport, Jamaica Bay as a new economic engine. This area was highly affected. What you see in blue was flooded, and as you might remember, JFK also stopped working for 3 days or more. That made a huge economical loss. So what we did is to create a public transportation, which is in orange, that surrounds the bay and made the inwards back to marshland, and then developed the high-density city behind the levee, which houses the public transportation, with various programs spread around downtown, entertainment that all faces the marshland. So this is we like this idea that Manhattan is all about looking outwards to the water, and this one is everyone looking into the ecological bay. So these are some relevant projects, and now we would like to get into actual proposal. This was one of the key images that we liked by going through in a very early stage, how you see the Trinity River corridor and you see the trace of the old river and how city has been developing around that. Also, we noticed the idea of the fortress, how the city is now fortressed by a highway. So our ambition was to unlock this situation. But it's actually already unlocked. As you know, there are so many amazing initiatives to forge this areas around downtown, but we thought that since our site is also here, we could combine this idea of unlocking the fortress and the two rivers. So creating almost a new city along the river that passes by the downtown. The team is, as we were introduced, very diverse, and we also have such a diverse and different level of content, so we will present with 4 people today. This was how our office was, since July, dominated by Dallas. So our meeting room had this kind of huge wallpaper that reminded us every day how difficult the project is, or how interesting this project was. So in a very banal sense, our strategy is to think regional. Think regional sounds very, again, banal, but actually in this case, very relevant. In terms of planning and identity, also transportation and ecology, 3 issues. So the Trinity River, as I said, we think there's a potential to develop the old river adjacent to the new river. That makes our site a kind of missing piece, and also gives a different direction other than just an extension of the downtown, but also something that strategically connects what's happening on the south and north along the river. Also, in any given city which has a very rich river in the center, of course the city grows around the river. This is the river, and this is the Loop 12. So actually, if the river is running in the center of Loop 12, our imagination for the future of Dallas is that you grow now having the river in the center. We also looked at regionally watershed. So our site is here. We looked at the water network, which will be explained by Mia later. So through this analysis, we came up with these 3 abstract words: 2 rivers, 2 datums, and 2 cities. This is a current situation, vertically stretched, downtown, basically where the highways are, Levy and Trinity. So what we're proposing is 2 cities that echoes downtown density, but also runs north-south instead of just an extension. 2 datums. We discovered that the datum of the Levy is more or less the same as the datum of the downtown. And then 2 rivers, which we'll explain later, that again echoes the old river. So almost like unveiling what used to be there. Someone called it like waxing, but it's not. This is trying to reveal the old river. And 2 datums is the notion that our ambition to connect this level, the Levy level, to downtown level in a different way. First proposal, well, the first big move we are making is that from the Levy we are creating a manipulation that makes the water closer to the city, and the city here closer to the water. Using the natural topography, this is as it gets darker, it's more lower. So there's a natural valley. So this is our big move: 2 arc coming out from the city, coming towards the water, and another one that goes to the city. So we call it kind of double D since this afternoon. But we think it's actually quite interesting how this 2 Ds actually coincide and create a kind of complementing the natural valley. By doing so, we create this kind of, on one side, a shallow, continuous ground from Levy towards downtown, or we call it a horizontal skyscraper that bridges from downtown to the Levy and even to the other side of the river. Also, we have looked at the current pedestrian and bike path, and we discovered that, of course, in our site it doesn't exist because, of course, it's covered heavily by infrastructure. But by these two arcs, double D, we create some kind of a missing link. And then even utilizing the riverfront boulevard, which will be explained later, creates even higher density of network. Cultural Valley is an idea, again, to use two datums as a feature of this project. So you know that this Frankfurt Light Theater is actually next to the Turtle Creek and having the anchor of the relationship of culture and nature. So we thought actually this valley now is a very casual valley that is covered by infrastructure. By improving it, we can turn it into some kind of a mixture of infrastructure, culture, and ecology. So this is the lowest valley that will be become a kind of buffer zone between two cities, but also as well as a kind of cultural anchor that runs through north and south. We also made the zoning of the buildings around it to complement that ambition by having the highest point towards the water and then going down towards the valley. So that the valley, when you're in the valley, you feel more open to the sky and also have different experience. Like this, where it's much smaller scale, more cultural program, behind having a downtown behind. So it's almost like a river of culture and activity runs through both new and old city, like this one. Two cities are the notion that, again, we are thinking not this, our site, as not as an extension of downtown, but more of a new city notion that runs next to Trinity. But also this new city could expand, obviously, to the other side of the river. And one of which we will explain, but for example, architecture can contribute. This is a gateway building we are thinking as one of the first intervention that could happen. Is to reinforce the axis of Main Street. This is Main Street, this is Dealey Plaza, and go beyond, create a strong axis to direct people's understanding of the city towards the water. So that's here. And then that will probably enhance the notion that the city can actually expand to the other side. And this arched building looks like the building that could, or that is almost like start walking, is creating an arch on one direction, but also, as you know, Dallas, because the highways are running north-south, you come into the city often through the highway, which we thought we should give also an arch to that direction, so it's giving an arch, a welcoming gateway to both sides. So now I pass it on to Jason Long for the more detailed design for the connections that we created.
So looking at the potential really direct connections throughout the site, both beyond our site and also directly within it, we've identified 4 key moments. The first is here at the arena, extending perhaps the DART station through a programmatic bridge over to the design district. And then on the south, another potential connection, technically outside of our site, but linking, and again, the DART station here over to the properties at Matthew Southwest here. Those frame 2 larger connections from downtown. The first is at Dealey Plaza and Main Street, and the second is at the Houston and Jefferson Viaducts, just adjacent to the convention center. So first, Dealey Plaza. So Dealey Plaza is really at the heart of the problem that this competition faces. It's right at the edge of downtown, where downtown is truncated by all the infrastructure and present on this site. And it also, of course, has a very symbolic and present weight in Dallas's history as a gateway into Dallas, quite literally, but also, of course, because of the events that took place there. We think that that notion of that place as a gateway and as a symbolic heart for Dallas can only be enhanced by trying to create something out of it that becomes a little bit more of a place for Dallas. Right now, passing under this triple underpass is a little bit challenging. But from it, you can also sometimes have a view back to Dallas and then potentially also back to the Trinity River itself, creating a visual connection that we think is really key to shifting people's minds from one in which this area and the Trinity beyond it are really segmented from the city. So the Dealey Plaza today, I think most people that live here would agree, is not really a place within the city. It has a significance, a very deep significance, but it's not a place that people feel that they occupy, really. We're proposing to really memorialize the place, to memorialize what happened there through the introduction of a new water feature and the expression of stormwater running through Main Street currently, so daylighting that, in order to create a water and pedestrian passage from downtown all the way to the Trinity. We think that that will actually greatly enhance the Dealey Plaza and the experience of it, both for people, tourists visiting the site, who suddenly can, from this vantage point, take photographs and view back to the place where the assassination occurred, but also a place where locals can come and connect directly down to the Trinity. We're also proposing, as part of this scheme, a potential bridge that would go up and over the railway viaduct here, allowing an even greater vantage point back to downtown and to the Trinity, and also shielding Dealey Plaza from the noise of the railway itself. That also would provide the potential for a loop for visitors that would extend up onto that lookout point and then back down to the JFK Memorial Plaza beyond. So this is a view looking down toward the Trinity, and then this potential view back through the triple underpass and also to the Gateway building that Sho described a minute ago. We think that this place is something also that could happen quite quickly, maybe not in this form exactly, but in some form, either temporary or permanent, where a pedestrianization of Main Street here would really transform both this space and the city's connection to the Trinity and to the site, even before any major development starts. As I mentioned, that's also a key element in linking into the water and ecology that Mia will describe later, really tracks throughout the site, bringing water back to the old river channel. So water extends down from Main Street to Riverfront itself and then down and along. And a passage links Main Street all the way through this Gateway building, the walking building, down to the Trinity. So we go from today, where the view down Main Street obviously terminates in maybe not the best way, to something where there's a properly framed entry where the presence of the stamens, and I'll discuss a little bit later how we want to adjust that a little bit, becomes something that's not a complete barrier between the city and the river beyond. The second kind of gateway feature or connection feature that I want to talk about is a link to the Continental Pedestrian Bridge. It's the Trinity Arc that Sho described earlier. That arc is a pedestrian and bike path together with this arc, which we call the Dallas Arc, that connects to the pedestrian bridge here, loops it around, and then provides a terminus for it here at a place we call the Trinity Tower. It's a building that would sit within the Trinity River corridor leading down to it to provide a place where visitors could come and get down to the river directly for access to recreation, and where research could take place above. The third location is at the Houston and Jefferson Viaducts. As Sho described, we imagine this as a horizontal skyscraper, so effectively a series of programs infilled between the two viaducts, creating horizontally between the convention center and across to Oak Cliff, a continuous series of programs and activations and roofscapes that would invite visitors across and also navigate over the horseshoe and across the levees. It's a horizontal skyscraper, so almost like the Empire State Building lying down. In fact, it's 3 Empire State Buildings lined up. So you'd have the tallest flat building in the world. So, and then here an existing photograph of the two viaducts. And then here you can see a series of buildings that not only activate this, but also mediate between the datum of downtown that's at the top of the viaducts and then the datum of the riverfront down here where there's activation of this street frontage through the programs within the buildings. So speaking of infrastructure, infrastructure is obviously a major component of the site and a major impediment to its success. There's quite a number of highways. It's a matter of fact, 40% of the site is occupied by infrastructure currently or impacted by it. And as Sho mentioned, 80% of that traffic that uses that infrastructure is currently bypassing Dallas. It's not going down to the core that this infrastructure all passes directly by. It's going elsewhere. The infrastructure around Dallas is, of course, a spoke and hub system. And that contributes to bringing cars and traffic down into the inner core of Dallas that doesn't necessarily need to be there, because this is the easiest way to get from point A to point B. Currently, of course, that's the way the cars go. So that's also shown in this diagram, where the main ring road is currently here at 10 miles around. We think that there's a potential to overcome a bit of this problem through an enhancement of the Loop 12. So creating a ring road at a 7-mile perimeter that, together with certain measures, perhaps limiting speed limits or other measures on the spokes, could make it more advantageous for drivers and traffic to bypass the city rather than coming directly to its core. So that people will go around rather than coming in. This is a situation very similar to many other cities throughout the world, especially cities with prominent rivers, as Dallas will have, where a main ring road exists at typically this exact same radius. We would implement that strategy over time, so gradually increasing the Loop 12, its capacity by taking out some junctions and reducing some intersections, and then introducing initially HOV lanes onto the spur roads, and then eventually implementing a more permanent solution of reducing the speed limit. This strategy actually works well with even currently considered measures happening in the city. What we think that makes possible is a pruning of the Stemmons Freeway, I-35, here. So one of the big problems is not just the fact that the Stemmons cuts through, but that the access points down onto Commerce and other streets actually have even bigger impact because of the clover leafing that takes place. So you can get very quickly from here to here, but trying to navigate the various cars coming off these roads is the biggest problem. And of course, they impede any kind of development of this area too and activation of it through program. So what we're looking to do is take away all of these things in red here, which means that that can go to that, or that this here, seen from the observation at the Hyatt, can go from this to this. So consolidating the Stemmons so that then there's more land available, and this passage here becomes something that's really navigable. The impact of removing those we don't think will be that much, and in any case we think it's worth it. This shows before and after how you would go, for example, down along Commerce currently, or taking another route. And what we achieve then is two different strategies that allow us to either go under the current infrastructure or over it. So under here at the Stemmons via Main Street, or over via the horizontal skyscraper at the Jefferson and Houston viaducts. We also think that that might set up a condition where the currently planned Trinity River Parkway here might not actually be necessary, alleviating one of the potential obstacles between the city and the river, and all of the enhancements that are currently planned for it. That would also be accomplished by upgrades that are even currently planned to Riverfront and the incorporation within Riverfront of either light rail or bus rapid transit lines. So this just shows a section of the reconceived right-of-way for Riverfront, an urban street that has a bus rapid transit or perhaps light rail going down its center with dedicated bike lanes and sidewalks, widened sidewalks. All of these moves, especially the two arcs, but also the way that water will eventually move through the site, create a series of islands, programmatic islands, we call them, that are distinct identities of development along the stretch of the old Trinity River. It starts with the tech campus at the top, linked to the design district to the north, bringing in tech companies that also appreciate the open floor plates that are available in old warehouse areas like the design district. Then the Trinity Loop. So within the Trinity Loop, directly adjacent to the river, where the river is actually pushing towards the city, residential development that could take place against the river with waterfront views and presence, and then also some office. The Civic Center Loop, a new office-oriented area around the horizontal skyscraper, flanking either side and linked and enhancing the convention center. And then at the southwest basin, primarily focused on residential and entertainment programs, including a new maritime museum at its core. And then all of that is linked through the new riverfront valley with a series of cultural programs and landscapes for visitors. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mia Lair to discuss the ecology.
Thank you. Well, and isn't water one of the important pieces of our work? This is, just to remind us of how the river and the history of the river ran through and Main Street, and then, of course, islands that originally existed. This is in the Dallas sort of metro region. This is the floodway that we're really addressing, and very conscious of sort of its benefits and its sort of problems. And of course, a river always has tributaries, and it's a system. And we have to manage this river system in a way that allows for people and the nature to coexist. And there's tremendous value in the way we address these issues. And of course, we have new technologies and new strategies to address how we deal with water. And we have one wonderful example of a stream and a lake that actually occur within the city, Turtle Creek, that actually has these wonderful streams and lakes that really have created an amazingly wonderful community. And the value is palpable. And we think that that sort of approach is something that we have to start bringing down the stream towards the river and along the river in what we're calling the streamway. And in an approach where, showed this image, basically the river is there, it's there in the industrial area, but you don't see it, it's lost. And water can move, and this is through the neighborhood in Turtle Creek and Exall Lake. So how do we deal with water in a way that's effective and which can address not only flooding problems, but creating a city of the future and really addressing densification and infrastructure and civility. Small, medium, and large types of typologies, whether it's pocket parks or retention ponds or the lake improvements in large corridor systems, those are all measures that we can take. And we know that we can bring up the property values and that walkability and community health increases. And there's a vibrancy, a set of indicators that we can definitely bring to the table. And so these are multi-beneficial projects. So instead of stressing the floodway and really trying to solve all the problems addressed that we need to address in terms of how water moves through this sort of region, we think that we can really start to disperse those interventions in the way we deal with water, the way it's dealt with in Turtle Creek, but many of the other creeks and sub-watersheds. So this is the catchment area and the area that we are addressing, and basically We do already have an island, Rock Island, albeit it's not necessarily an inhabitable island, but the point is that water is present. You get 40 inches of water a year, and we need to celebrate it. Of course, as part of the ABLE stormwater pumping system, there is a need to actually expand its capabilities, and 13 projects are planned to solve a current 100-year condition of flooding. And so we think it's time to capitalize on, as we're moving forward on this, for this project, and say, okay, all these 13 projects, and what could they be? And how do we move through this project in creating a really vital new community that's always relating to water? So this is basically the ABLE pump station that mechanically pushes water out, which is perhaps an old-fashioned way of dealing with water. And we think that we need to, as we're regrading the site and creating all this new development, that we need to think about the positive flow and actually, by gravity, move the water through to the Trinity floodway at the end of our island. So with that, Ben Feldman will run you through the ecology.
Thanks, Mia. We were very impressed by the amount of information that was provided to us by the city. This map that you see here that's incredibly complicated is actually all the underground stormwater system throughout downtown Dallas. You can see all the park shapes and all these lines that connect back out to the floodway. So our ambition originally was a little more robust and looked at even dealing with the levees in a more radical way, but working within the confines of the levee system and really understanding that there was this incredible opportunity that existed today, and the amount of wildlife and capacity for change and opportunity was present. So how can we reshape this area and, as Mia just pointed out, create this positive flow and make for a more healthy system? And largely, this is the desire line through the site that really relates to the existing topography, relates to the existing conditions for the city's infrastructure. But ultimately, what we're really trying to do is express water at the surface and look to this idea of daylighting storm drains. We provided this diagram on the panel. It's incredibly rich in terms of its information to help you kind of understand this. This top right diagram does show all the sub-drains or sub-basins that's collected and captured off the city streets as well as properties. They do correlate to this central system diagram. So each color then connects back to those areas within the sub-basin. And at the bottom here is the system going from north to south. And as you kind of experience the moments along there, you would see these volumes of water begin to aggregate and increase in size. So ultimately, this is a very kind of simple strategy, which is really capturing the water, conveying it, treating it, detaining and retaining it, ultimately to, in the end, release it back into the Trinity floodway as clean water. So to help kind of further understand this, we created this animation which shows you how the water begins to carry around through different separate channels of systems. As you experience that, you would see how we're, again, building up the volume of the water and seeing it also in section. And we really wanted to do this to fully understand its capacity for being realized and understanding that while we're working within the system, we do need to kind of make some adjustments in terms of grading this southern basin to allow for all this water to drain in that direction and then finally release itself back into the Trinity corridor. To do that, we not only just wanted to think more on an engineering level, but also in terms of the ecology that works with a new form of mobility. So of course, we can't all think about just driving around the site, but really how do you experience this in a more tangible way? So this graphic was also on the board, which is also quite rich, which are these series of sections that you would encounter along the way. And together with this palette of landscape ecology types, we really took an effort to kind of understand what the right plant materials were to appropriately filter as well as provide habitat along the way. So here's a kind of a sequence that gets you into more of the moment of that space, really understanding the smallness of some of these applications, just more of a small runnel. We're also looking at a series of runnels that relate to that water feature that you saw coming off Dealey Plaza, up in this sector, coming down Main Street, right underneath the Stemmons Viaduct. And looking at opportunities for plazas, fountains as well, that can actually detain some of this water body as it's making its way south. And also the street systems also offer this opportunity to create these lineal performative opportunities. And finally, as we're moving further on the site here, closer to what is currently a sump condition, we are really trying to work hard to transform that notion of a sump, which is maybe less desirable than, say, a stream, and convert into this new Trinity Streamway option. And so we're seeing this volume of water gradually increase. We're also designing opportunities for flooding, filtering, and this opportunity for getting people up into the trees. This is an idea for a Trinity River Arboretum that would work with the Trinity Forest just down the stream. And then, of course, since we have all this water, we really need to figure out more robust opportunities for treating that, creating larger and larger pools, until eventually we get into this condition that looks like a water world that's almost totally artificial, but in fact, it is a means of allowing for some opportunities that look phenomenally more larger than they are, because we're doing a couple of tricks here in terms of creating an infinity-type edge where we're allowing the U.S. Dallas to come back and be featured as a prominent cultural landmark tied with one of our rich cultural programs on the site. And with that, Mia's going to turn back to the program.
Thank you. Very quickly, basically, we obviously have a series of trails that now have been connected throughout the area. And we wanted to bring you back to the plan and to sort of just highlight some of the spaces and how they sort of come alive. And here you're looking at the Jefferson Viaduct. And again, water is here, and how do we deal with it? And how do we make it part of the ecology? And if I was thinking of 3 words that I would sort of highlight as far as sort of the work we're trying to do here, one is resilience, the other is placemaking, and the other is balance. And so, this is about infrastructure, of course, but it's about bringing infrastructure to life and bringing people to it and helping them understand it and be a part of it. At the Houston riverfront, where we have the horizontal skyscraper, we also bring this sort of datum to life by creating around the new development these moments to come down towards the streamway and also be able to go up and down into the skyscraper. And the filtration master, which is right next to the mix master, here it is, and this is what it could be. Every opportunity of a low point, very well strategized and planned and, of course, engineered to hold water and to actually deliver it further down the streamway in a clean and filtered way. So again, small projects, medium-sized projects, and then larger scale projects, all associated with water, all creating an amazing new environment. And as far as the program, and it was described earlier, we have the Trinity Loop, the Civic Center Loop, and the South Basin. And we have a really rich set of ideas associated with already some great planning and selection of plant material that's been done on the Trinity corridor and the Trinity projects along the way. and really sort of trying to balance public and semi-public space and cultural venues and active recreation and passive recreation, and bringing people to the water and helping people really kind of relate to the water in a way that's rich and wholesome, and really kind of bringing this whole new part of the city to life. With all sorts of, Ben mentioned a few, but floating wetlands and other sort of strategies. We're, of course, very concerned about the way of deploying all these projects in a way that makes sense, and that it doesn't cause any problems down the line associated with water and water cleanliness. So 319 acres of this streamway, as we're calling it, of connected city that connects the city and really addresses sort of this sort of public realm in a sort of new and meaningful way. Show?
Just want to quickly, in a way, summarize by looking at one of the key ingredients for the success of the site, which is the current landowners, the major landowners within the site, and how we think what we're designing impacts their ability to move forward. So I mentioned before, we think that one of the main things we think would be a great place to start would be at Dealey Plaza and potential adjustments there. Other things like infrastructure may take a little more time. We think that the adjustments to the Southwest Basin are something that could be and should be started very soon. And I'll go through a few others and that link very specifically to these landowners. So here's the overall program that I mentioned before. It's a very mixed-use program all throughout with specific identities depending on the program mix. This, as we'll talk later, of course, is shown as a kind of maximum development density at a kind of the horizon of development, not in 10 years. But in terms of what can happen soon, we think that this property here, the Foster property, which is at the entry to the new bridge, the new Calatrava Bridge, is greatly enhanced by the Trinity Arc. That's also something that we think, in conjunction with the pedestrian bridge, could actually be something that could be started quite soon. And also eventually, also soon, the improvements to riverfront will really enhance the viability of this property, together with perhaps the notion of this tech campus linked to the design district. Here, adjacent to the current site of the courthouse and the prison, the Battaglia property we think is also greatly enhanced by the presence of riverfront and the enhancement of it, and is also a site linked with the potential adjustments to Main Street and Dealey Plaza. Could really come alive as a gateway between the site, between downtown and the river. So this shows a view then looking at the Gateway building, back at the Gateway building, and this Battaglia property, which is here, effectively, and here's the Stemmons. And then now to the next zone, which is the horizontal skyscraper. We think that that's also something, this infill of the Houston-Jefferson viaducts, that could happen quite soon. It can happen piecemeal, phased in over time, and is in a way an extension of the parking lot that's already present between the two viaducts. And then also could happen in smaller infill conditions along the ground here, which is shown in some of the views we showed earlier. And then last, potentially the improvements to the Southwest Basin, we think are things that can happen quite soon and will be really instrumental in increasing the value and viability of these properties and of things that will happen here. So including the potential Maritime Museum.
I just want to end with a very simple note that these developments, as Jason said, is a kind of vision to show you our fundamental vision, which is to redirect the notion of the city along the river and also bring the existing asset, which is ecological water, as a new identity next to the levee, and also creating a improvement on network or the mobility to the city, that all three come together and creates a new notion, new growth, new city. So obviously we maximize that kind of FAR for that, but we truly believe that even without those taller buildings, which of course 3 teams actually made so proudly, but with a very key moment of insertion of ecological intervention and also some key connections that we showed you, will achieve what we are ultimately aiming for. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for that tremendous work. If we could have the lights up a little bit. We do have a few moments for question and answer, and I imagine there might be a question or two, so we'll open it up and the team will field your questions as they come. Yes, in the back.
What happened to the toll road?
So the question, to repeat it, was what happened to the toll road?
Well, we're proposing that it not happen, effectively.
Yes, here.
How many lanes is proposed for Stemmons?
The question was number of lanes for Stemmons.
Yeah, maybe. We're not proposing to change the number of current lanes in Stemmons. But in Riverfront Boulevard, though, would become 3 lanes on either side with a new bus rapid transit, 2 lanes for dedicated to buses in the middle, in the median.
Outside on the 45, each trailer outside, I saw a transit system called a hood. Can you tell me what that can be like?
The question is transit hub.
Oh, I see. Well, so one proposal is to use the managed HOV lanes on the spur roads as a way to try to manage traffic coming down into Dallas to try to kind of maximize the efficiency.
You was talking about
A hub.
next to Union Station.
I see. Well, I think that area is for sure going to become an important transit hub with the potential rail coming in, high-speed rail. I mean, who knows if that will happen, but at least from our perspective. But there's certainly the potential there for that to be an important place within the city.
Yeah, there's a lot to like about this plan, but I have skepticism about certain aspects, like the 2-city plan. Basically, it's presuming a bunch of construction on a big sandbar that we call our levee. And I'd like to know how much consulting you've done with the Corps of Engineers about whether they would even permit buildings to be constructed on the levee, and about the stability of the levee itself. What we saw in New Orleans was that once the water started to rise, it didn't even have to cap the levee because it was just a bunch of sand. The water rose and it just pushed that levee away. And that's something I'm concerned about, the feasibility of this construction on the levee areas for the second city. And also, when you're talking about the hub moving all of this traffic to Loop 12, have you considered that the people living in the Loop 12 area, particularly the park cities, they might not go along with having a freeway go through Highland Park? I mean, have you thought about these things?
First of all, every project gets certain skepticism, so that's always how we work together with you and respond. First, maybe it was not clear, but we are not touching the levee at all. Our intervention is always next to the levee. So sometimes the section made it look like we are putting the building on top of a levee, which looks like it, but this is a section that, this is a section that you're cutting where the levee is, and you're seeing the city behind it. So because the levee is kind of turning, I'm sorry, it's very actually super unclear that it's not. You can see in the plan. So just that's our mistake in this diagram, but we are not touching the levee. And we had exact comment from the city this afternoon about Loop 12. We think that, yes, we might discourage people to live around Loop 12 or politically give certain turbulence to people who are there, but eventually in the longer run, to create much more livable core that will actually enhance, because that means you will have less traffic in the center. That means that will encourage people over time to come back to the city center and live in the center. So yes, we have to take a careful balance, but we think there's a value to make that make that system work.
If I could ask a follow-up concerning your horizontal skyscrapers.
Mm-hmm.
Would the U.S. Corps of Engineers even allow you to put to do all of these offices and things in the floodplain underneath the bridge, which is what you showed? I mean, could they even get flood insurance to do this?
Well, I think if you look at the plan of what we're showing between Houston and Jefferson, we're actually not showing, we're showing one connection building going down into the actual Trinity, the corridor itself, the floodway, as similar to the one we showed, a kind of recreation point that wouldn't have offices going down to touch the bottom, but just a conveyance basically for recreation purposes. But the majority of the development between those two viaducts is actually happening on the other side of the levee.
In the back.
This is a pretty amazing transformation of wonderful presentation. I'm wondering in the creative process if any of you had precedents, historical or otherwise, that you were kicking around where something like this has maybe occurred, or a transformation in this vein has been kind of enacted or at least imagined.
Yeah, I know what the question is. Well, I think there are precedents not in overall components of it, but for example, the traffic improvement itself, it happened in many cities. The water introduction of daylighting, the stormwater and so on, that happens very successfully, for example, in Seoul, in South Korea recently, and many other cities. Also in LA, MIA is actually working on those kind of transformation. I don't know if maybe Dallas wants to be the first to transform so well, but is your kind of trick question? I think Dallas would be the first to combine all this ambition if it happens, but there are many precedents. If you're interested, we can show you at some point.
We saw a hand. Yeah, back here.
I was curious, you were talking about your view through the corridor, and currently our view is our courthouse systems. Have you done any economic analysis of what that trade-off would be, what it would cost us to relocate and then put new infrastructure in?
We haven't done a cost analysis, but we know that that's the ambition ultimately the city has. Was it city? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we were told that it could be relocated. It's planned. It's planned, actually. So someone must have done the economic study.
Over here.
So in regards to the primary objective of connecting downtown with the riverfront area, and specifically I'm talking about North Riverfront Boulevard. So if you go to maybe slide 127 or so, you have these two loops, one coming from roughly downtown and taking traffic, well south to the Reunion area. You've got a water feature, Main Street towards the jail, and then you've got the DART station going. You can go over or under. There's a bridge right there. You can go under with the DART station. But how are you connecting downtown with that North Riverfront Boulevard? 127 is fine.
But
Count the slide.
this just says some markings on it. But
So it looks like you have to do one heck of a U-turn if you're coming out of downtown to get back north, up into that North Riverfront area. How do you connect that?
onto Riverfront Boulevard?
Yeah.
No. Are you talking about, well, one thing is you could come down either Elm or Commerce and hit Riverfront and go up. You're talking about from a pedestrian or
you can't do that as a pedestrian, as you pointed out. You'll get mud going under the bridge. But as a pedestrian or a bicyclist, or what's new?
What's new is the proposal to make Main Street itself pedestrian and bike only, so that there will be a new kind of bikeable and pedestrian path linking from downtown right here all the way down to Riverfront and then beyond, but certainly intersecting Riverfront.
So on either side of the water feature, you can walk or bike?
Yes, yes. And that's its primary purpose. The water feature is, of course, we want to bring also the presence of water because we want to mark the notion of the Trinity River and the reintroduction of water into this whole area. So that's a key component of it, but its functional purpose is a pedestrian passage.
In front here.
The technical analysis that you've done is quite brilliant and described quite well. Could you talk poetically about how you think these interventions would, what it would mean for our city?
Why don't I go and you also? Poetically, I never thought architects were allowed to be so poetic, but I think it's poetically it creates a contrast to the current downtown, which is predominantly hardscape, and this will create some kind of a much more ecological development that echoes what one of the most amazing feature of your city, which goes to the south in the nature. So that is brought up to the urban environment. So you will experience a totally new city center, which is much more combined with water and ecological system. And on top of it, that runs parallelly to the another amenity. So really creates a corridor of new types of experience.
So, Sho shared a few statistics about how many, big cities there are and how many people are going to be living in cities. And I think this is kind of, there's a new paradigm here. How do we create, an opportunity for growth, for density, for multi-generational living? Again, a place of resilience, a place of beauty, a place of a sort of a continuity in a life. I mean, you travel and you meet people in different communities, and I didn't know exactly what people from Dallas called themselves. I decided the Lazians, but it turns out I was wrong. But the passion with which people talk about their city and living here is, even though they're trying to hide sometimes, there's complexes. It's like I feel like I'm an ambassador for Los Angeles. Hopefully, I'll be an ambassador for Dallas, because people have a lot of complexes about these cities that were sort of, predominantly were created predominantly with sort of infrastructure. And where either the car, well, mostly the car, took precedent. And, people weren't, and how people live, it was not what planners or certainly visionaries or leaders were really addressing. And, you know, really, we've hit the wall. I mean, there is no choice. You have to do something. I mean, this is not whether and if. You're going to have to do something. You're going to grow, and you know, if you continue growing outward, you're going to have a whole other set of issues. So, I just think that, you know, it's an opportunity, and it's coming at the right time, at the right moment, to create an incredibly vibrant place that can actually, you know, basically allow generations to really take advantage of your decisions. This generation will, you know, be holding the mantle. So I don't know if that's poetic, because if I talked about water, I have a series of people that I know in the audience who talk beautifully and poetically about water. And of course, in the end, this is a lot about water and what it does for our soul.
Yeah, one more. I think by bringing the river or the amenity back closer to the city is, you know, also a little bit romantic idea to bring back the historical relationship of the river to the city. And I think that's somehow also kind of poetic nature. And we think that it's, for example, our proposal to create a Dealey Plaza to a place to stay and, you know, to appreciate the memory. I think that is at the same time romantic, but gives a new start to the mentality of that of the city, we believe.
I'm still confused about that. It looks like it disappears on here. It looks like I-35 and I-30 disappear. And as you said, you're not reducing their size. And the biggest impediment in my mind to development between the Trinity and downtown is the freeway corridor, the portion. It looks like it disappears when you're saying it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't. Is the easiest way to answer it. But so here's the stamens here. They're just, it's pushed together. So that's our, and the off ramps onto Commerce and things are removed. And then the horseshoe is all here. Actually, we haven't removed any of that. It's just that we're proposing roads that actually go over the horseshoe itself at moments when they can, including, you know, obviously that's already happening with Houston and Jefferson.
Maybe you want to get up and because you know, they try to make such a beautiful watercolor that, you know, they probably confuse the stamens.
So these things are all above stem.
Yeah.
Seen here.
Yes.
The freeway system is all below.
Yes.
Sometimes the drawing here, this is showing a road actually going under stamens, but you can kind of see it just so you'll know it's there. That's a little confusing, especially kind of, it's a little blurry too, maybe, so, in this case. But it's there.
Robert, you have a question?
Going back to water, what you're proposing with the old river channel looks like connecting the northern portion to the southern portion. And you're talking also about not pumping but using the gravity to move the water through. Are you proposing levee gates, let's say, at the south end and maybe as well as the north end where the Elmcourt used to flow into, to, like during normal flow, to move the water through?
Yes.
Yes.
Sort of. Yes, we are creating what's called a sluice, which is a type of floodgate, but it's a much more of a managed approach. It's not a defensive condition. But in terms of the northern portion, what we're actually doing is tapping into some of the storm drains that are actually exiting here and bringing them to the surface to be pulled into the system and then rerouted. So we're trying to capture as much water for the purpose really to relieve that pressure of a flooding condition and all that water trying to go to the floodway, and we're trying to pull it through our site and then let it exit right below the Trinity Forest. It's sort of a shame the site plan cut off right here. This is the spur for the light rail, and just beyond that is the corridor for the Trinity Forest.
So are you proposing, like, let's say with Turtle Creek is buried basically between Cedar Springs and Fairmont. Are you proposing that be daylighted again?
No.
The water that's carried off of Turtle Creek does flow underneath the stamens currently, so that is also part of that diagram that you see, and we are collecting that water.
To me, it seems water in Texas sometimes be kind of a double-edged sword. We have an abundance or complete lack of. I was wondering just what kind of investigations y'all did into more severe drought conditions and how that relates to the proposal.
We can both answer that. Well, actually, we would do, obviously, more exploration if we were so lucky as to be commissioned. And we have wonderful hydrologic engineers that actually are out of Holland, who have dealt with water issues in a very interesting way over a few generations. So the answer is there will be areas where it won't be, we won't artificially put water into water features. These are not water features. So the question is, for example, if you have a river, if you create a riverine environment with some boulders and some of the plant material that typically lives in water or alongside of water, you'll manage the width and the depth of it in such a way that if it's, has hardly any water, that, it still looks, good, and it still functions in the way it needs to function. We call them dry streams in the drier parts of the country.
Well, if there are no other questions, I see no hands. Please join. Oh, we've got one more. Yeah.
Is ecology a deep part of the Shohei devices, such as trees or cars?
Actually, it's a good question, which we have had a few presentations today, including to some of the city professionals, and one of the things is we really think that you need an urban forest that's properly managed, and we plan as part of our sort of ecological transect to actually plant a tremendous amount of trees. And I agree, we were here in the summer and it was hard to walk around, but that's definitely the ambition, is to really make it very comfortable and a wonderful and alternative, rather than getting in your car, to be on a bike or by foot in the shade.
Great. Well, please join me in thanking Team OMA for all their good hard work. And as a reminder, all of this is also available at connectedcitydesign.com, so you can go and view, zoom in and look at the detail of all the work. It's also available up on Ross Plaza at the DMA in a container exhibit that's open during lunch most days. And please join us. And please join us back here next week for Stoss Plus Shop.
Thank you for watching this video. For more information, please visit connectedcitydesign.com.